My name's John Hilary. I'm the Executive Director of War on Want, and I've been working for the past 20 years on issues of trade, investment and globalization. And I'm here to talk about TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is this mega deal currently being negotiated by the European Commission, on the one hand, representing all European countries, and the US government on the other. And they started negotiations in July of 2013. And the two sides meet every 2 months between Brussels and Washington, D.C., or indeed in the last set of negotiations in New York. And the original idea had been to rush the negotiations through by the end of 2015. But they've realized they can't do that. They've said they've had to abandon that schedule, partly because of this growing outrage around the world as to what TTIP is going to bring. In the beginning, the myths that they put out about TTIP were that it was somehow going to boost the economies of Europe and the economy of the USA and lead everybody out of recession. But they've since dropped those claims. They've recognized that the claims were bogus. And instead we know that TTIP is going to lead directly to the loss of 1 million jobs between the European Union and the USA combined. We also know that it's going to lead to environmental catastrophe because it's going to increase the emission of greenhouse gases, leading to irreversible climate change. And even according to the European Union's own official estimates, it will be a severe danger for biodiversity. So for all of these reasons, TTIP is a disaster. The three main pillars of TTIP give a sense of what the content is. The first pillar is deregulation. TTIP is not your traditional trade deal, which we saw in the 20th century, where you have negotiations around tariffs at the border. So one side will drop their tariff on coffee imports, the other will drop their tariff on steel imports. The tariff levels between the European Union and the USA are already at minimal levels. And so this new agreement is about reaching behind the border, and it's about removing what they call regulatory barriers. That means getting rid of the environmental standards, the labour standards, the food safety standards, all of the social standards that we consider to be most important, just so that business can operate without any infringement of its right to make profits in the future. So the first pillar is deregulation, and that's right at the centre of TTIP. The second pillar of TTIP is privatization, the idea that the private sector should be granted more and more access to markets that it's never had access to before. And we know, for example, that a lot of public services are included within TTIP. Health is on the table, education at all levels, rail, post, road, water, sewerage and financial services are all included in the deal. And that's a real threat because once you have a privatized public service included in a trade deal like TTIP, you don't get it back. The whole point is that these are meant to be irreversible liberalizations. So the first pillar, deregulation, second pillar, privatization. And the third pillar is perhaps the most controversial, the most outrageous. It's the introduction of these new corporate courts under what's called the Investor State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, the ISDS. And this means that US corporations for the first time will get the opportunity to be able to sue European governments in their own separate judicial system, available only to them, if there's any sense that a public policy introduced in one of those countries will undermine the profits of the US corporations. And there's been over 600 cases of this sort introduced through other trade treaties around the world over the last 20 years. So we've got a really good sense of what the potential impact will be. For example, Philip Morris, the big multinational tobacco company, suing the government of Australia for daring to bring in a public health law requiring all cigarettes to be sold in plain packaging, or Veolia, the French company, suing the government of Egypt for raising the minimum wage, or Achmea, a Dutch company, successfully suing the government of Slovakia for reversing a very unpopular health privatization. These are really serious threats to democracy and to the rule of law in the future. And that's why there's such a massive outcry against TTIP, and particularly against these corporate courts and the deregulation agenda at the heart of it. The final thing to say about TTIP is that it can't come into being without passing through a series of procedures, first at the European level and then in national parliaments. To begin with, all of the member states of the European Union, the 28 heads of those member states, have to agree it in the Council of Ministers. Then it goes to the European Parliament, where a vote will take place as to whether or not to let TTIP go through. And then it would have to come to all national parliaments. And at each stage, there will be a massive campaign saying that the people of Europe want nothing to do with TTIP. We're already seeing millions of people come out in all countries of Europe saying that we don't want TTIP, we don't want this nightmare vision of the future where all of our most cherished, our most prized social and environmental standards are sacrificed on the altar of free trade fundamentalism. And that's why I'm convinced we will win, we will defeat TTIP, because the European people are saying, no, we want nothing like this in our lives. We aspire to something better in the future for future generations and for the planet. There's stacks of good information available online to find out more about TTIP. If you want to get the basics, go to waronwant.org/TTIP and you can download all of the information we have. You can also order hard copies to distribute amongst your friends. If you want to know about the other organisations in Britain taking action, go to nottip.org.uk and you'll find a whole list of them there. And if you want to sign up the European Citizens Initiative, which has already collected over 1.7 million signatures saying no to TTIP from across the whole of Europe, just go to waronwant.org/ECI. But there's masses of stuff available. If you even look at the news pieces coming out at the moment, you get a real sense of how people are coming out onto the streets saying no to TTIP. And every day there are more news pieces from across the world saying why this is going to be a deeply dangerous agreement if we allow it to go through.